It's more dodgy than I thought. Okay, let's begin with the prayer, which is the prayer for today. It's the prayer that's linked to the season of creation and it's been written by Pope Francis. Together, all-powerful God, you're present in the whole universe and the smallest of your creatures. You embrace with your tenderness all that exists. Pour out upon us the power of your love, that we may protect life and beauty. Fill us with peace, that we may live as brothers and sisters, harming no one. O God of the poor, help us to rescue the abandoned and forgotten of this earth, so precious in your eyes. Bring healing to our lives, that we may protect the world and not prey on it, that we may sow beauty, not pollution and destruction. Touch the hearts of those who look only for gain at the expense of the poor and the earth. Teach us to discover the worth of each thing, to be filled with awe and contemplation, to recognise that we are profoundly united with every creature as we journey towards your infinite light. We thank you for being with us each day. Encourage us, we pray, in our struggle for justice, love and peace. Amen. Okay, so for the next 20 minutes, we're going to look at the context of touchstones. There's 8 touchstones that are part of the new curriculum for Catholic schools, Tātou Whakapono Our Faith. And I'm going to break them down for you. They've each got an icon for the kids. And in terms of the school, they actually move through. So there's 8 brackets of kids from our 5 and 6-year-olds, 7 and 8-year-olds, 9 and 10-year-olds, 11 and 12-year-olds, 13, 14-year-olds, 15-year-olds, 16-year-olds, 17-year-olds. And each of those are going to sort of have presented to them a spotlight, if you like, on one of these touchstones. And then afterwards, we will have a conversation. So first of all, the heading for the session is Path to Discipleship. There are many paths, many different ways for discipleship. We're only focusing on a few. But these touchstones are based on the Gospels, and they were lived by Jesus and by his family and friends. And we're all on a spiritual journey, a hikoi wairua. And what I'm hoping is that some of these things will resonate with you and you'll be able to immediately say, yeah, I know exactly what he's talking about. Because I'm very conscious that a lot of this will be teaching my grandmother to suck eggs. Right? And there's an opportunity for us to think about the challenge for ourselves and for our church. So look, the first one is welcomed. So you imagine our little 5 and 6-year-olds arriving and the theme that they encounter is welcomed. Because we remember that Jesus was welcomed at Bethlehem by his whānau, by shepherds and angels. And the shepherds and the angels are mentioned by the writers of the gospel stories in particular to have a sense that this message was all-encompassing, that the welcome of Jesus wasn't just by those few, but was by the whole earth. And that he and his family also experienced the path of blessing. So what we get the kids to focus on, and what I think it's useful for us to focus on, is those moments when I am welcomed. So there are moments in your life where you have been welcomed. And that's part of a path of discipleship. Even if it's not necessarily in a spiritual context, because we're part of a human family, that welcome that we experience is something that connects us to one another. And we get the kids to reflect on the fact that they also have welcomed others, right? So those moments when we welcome one another, if we think of our context in church perhaps, there are moments on Sunday Mass where we actually welcome strangers. Often in the Catholic context, their experience is that they haven't been welcomed, right? And often remember those days before when we didn't have people at the door at all, and now we have people at the door that make sure that people are actually acknowledged and noticed. And that sense of welcome, if we think of it as beginning in that person of Christ, or the fact that Christ was first welcomed, and then us sort of sharing in that discipleship journey. So the next touchstone is that of loved. And so we realise that in Mary's first yes, Jesus was loved before he was born. And that we realise that in Joseph's yes to Mary's yes, that Jesus was loved. And then we see as Jesus sort of moves through his ministry, that it's Jesus' love, his araha, that actually touches out and reaches and changes people's hearts as well. So we know that the gift of Jesus to us is like the ultimate love of God Father and Creator. So again, we bring to mind moments when we are loved. I'm thinking you'll do this sort of when you head away, that those moments of our experience of love in our own lives is an experience of God's love for us and our connection to the love that Jesus preached through his whole ministry. So this is be our 7 and 8 year olds that we're particularly focusing on this sort of area. And then to bring to mind those moments when we have loved others. And those moments when people have been unloved or are not loved. And we can immediately bring to mind those things too. And I think of those, particularly the gospel stories where Jesus reaches out to those that are untouchable, literally. The lepers on the streets, when he reaches out to the Samaritan woman and has a conversation when in fact those two communities never actually spoke to each other. When he encourages the apostles to do the same, to look at those times when love is required, and then Jesus speaks out. So the third touchstone is that of inspired. Now, most biblical scholars would say that the apostles were inspired before they ever answered Jesus' call. So although Jesus called them to follow, and we'll touch on this in a minute, in actual fact they had encountered Jesus beforehand. This wasn't the first time that they spotted him, they suddenly dropped their nets and headed away. So when Jesus' inspiration, and I think there's lots in the gospel that we probably never ever had a sense of Jesus actually working before he started his public ministry, before he headed into the desert. But particularly at the start, we can sort of bring to mind this idea of this relationship between his cousin John the Baptist and Jesus coming to be baptised. And what does baptism mean? And how does Jesus' baptism inspire us to connect with our own baptism? And what opportunities there are to sort of reflect on that as we go. So in our inspiration of one another, and you think of those people that carry their faith. I'm thinking of ages ago, I'm not a huge follower of the All Blacks at the moment, but if you think back to those people of faith that have been part of the team that we've talked about, you know, not playing on a Sunday, some of them for a while, or not playing if they were Muslim, or these times when we actually realise that people live their faith and connect to one another and they actually show it to us. And we also need to think about those times when we've inspired others, and often it's in places when we're not actually aware that we've done it. You know, when our inspiration is, this is so jolly annoying. Terry, would you mind sitting at the keyboard and just tapping the down? Would that be all right? Because this will take forever otherwise. If people know you as a person of faith, if people know you as a Catholic person, then often they connect the words that you say with the actions that you've actually done. You know, there's a phrase that you whisper what you say and you shout who you are. And I think that that's particularly relevant in today's society when people are looking perhaps at the Catholic Church and thinking that it is all of the things that it is not. And that opportunity that we have to connect with the inspiration of Jesus and the inspiration of our own lives. So, thanks Terry. And that there are times when people have been led astray or tricked. So inspiration has two sides. All of these touchstones have two sides of the same coin, all part of that road to discipleship. Next one, thank you. So then when we're getting up to our older kids, we're talking about this concept of being called and what does it mean to be called and how much do you feel that you've been called? That one of the reasons that you are here is because in some way you're answering a call. And one of the ways that we sort of, and if you do the next two actually would be great, the ways that we have answered the call ourselves and the ways that we have called others to various things. You know, there's a saying in the church that if you want people to actually engage, one of the things you do is give them a job. And I think it's really important, and one of the things we share with the kids is that the jobs that we do are often the answer to a call, and that living out of that service is living out of our call as a path to discipleship, as a way of being disciples. And that when we reach out to others and help them to connect as well, there's something else quite wonderful that's going on there. And the last one, thanks. Sometimes people choose not to respond. And there's not necessarily a judgment on this, although we could look at our church today and say, well, is that's what's happening? Is people perhaps not participating as much on Sunday masses or not engaging in things Catholic, of being distant? Is that evidence of them not responding to a call, or are they responding to a call in a different way? And is there a call that's taking place in our church that's actually louder and richer than we might necessarily be aware of. When we talk about the call to vocations, to priesthood, to religious life, to being teachers, to being people who work in social justice, and the calls are all very different, and yet they resonate in similar ways. And we can think of the Samaritan woman here again, of that her answer to the call didn't seem so obvious. But what we know is that she went away and told everybody that she had encountered this Jesus, and she wanted to share what it was that he had said. So that sense of connection is critical. You can't be a disciple on your own. It's impossible. And you can't rock on up to Mass every Sunday and say, I'm a disciple of Jesus, and not encounter everyone else or not feel connected to the whole. It's not particularly Christian. It's definitely not Catholic. And so one of the reasons that we gather on Sundays is to feel and to live that sense of connection. And if we listen to the words of the Eucharistic prayer calling us to gather around the table and acknowledging us as actually being connected to the Eucharist. So as Catholics, our understanding of liturgy is not that we come along and attend Mass. It's that we participate in Mass. And not just that we participate in this single Mass that might come and go, but that we actually connect all the way back to that Last Supper of Jesus. That it's as though we are sitting with him and the apostles and the other disciples, those others that were gathered for that meal, which would have been women and children as well, and that we actually connect to Eucharist as though we were actually there. And so when we look at examples, say, of the prodigal son story, where we hear that whole story follows through, and we know all the stuff about the guy that's done all the terrible things. But the bit that we often don't realise, I think, is that as that son comes back, the father connects himself to the child through forgiveness, through immediate reconciliation. But then what he does is he connects the child to the brother. So it's not just father and son that are reconnected, but it's brother and brother that are reconnected. And often it's those extra links that we need to look for in our living out of our own discipleship. So there are times when you have absolutely connected people. Family's a great place to begin, because there's often a lot of disconnect and a lot of connect that takes place in families. We don't always have a lot of control over it. And there are times when we have helped to connect others to others. Teachers get this to do this a lot, because often there's fallouts in the playground, and there's families with all sorts of issues, but you will in your own place. But I wonder if you think of it often as you're answering the call of discipleship. And of course there are times when we have not connected with others as well. And when connections can get broken, and the fixing of those can be complicated. But we are called to reconciliation. How many times should I forgive? 7 times, 70 times even. Okay, and the next touchstone is that of trusted. So I think this is a powerful one to think of in a church that's a little bit broken at the moment. If we look through the whole timeline of history, if we think of the apostles right at the start that kept getting things wrong, well, Peter's a fantastic example. One of the things that a lot of biblical scholars say, that the image of Jesus in the middle of a storm, calming the storm, Peter calling out, saying, if it's really you, tell me to come and walk on the water and I'll be able to do that too, is a very strong metaphor written for what Peter must do in leading the church, the early church and the early Christians. His need to be connected to Jesus, and his need to actually be able to stand on his own knowing that Christ is there. And this walking and floundering and being pulled up as part of that process of the early church. And it's part of our process too. Often we're doing fine. I do a lot of interviews with kids, and a year 12 kid said to me, one time my faith, one day it's really good, and the next day it's like, I just don't really get into it. And I said, that's me. That's exactly what I'm like sometimes as well. And it's okay. On a path of discipleship, it ebbs and flows, but we need to know that we can reach up and that Jesus is there. So we are trusted, and we're trusted with the church as it is. Right? We're trusted to live our faith, to make mistakes and to fix it. So we think crusades, if we think times of the Inquisition, if we think times during Reformation and Counter-Reformation, We think of responses during Enlightenment. We think of responses post-Vatican II, pre-Vatican II. At all times, God trusts us. We have free will. We have the capacity to make immense changes. We have the ability to hold on to that which is good, to let go of things as well. And that what happens is that it's not pre-programmed. There's no ultimate answer, right? We are trusted, and we have been trusted, and we've trusted others. And most of us would be able to reflect on moments when trust has been broken. When we've done something or when someone's done something where trust is lost. And most of us would be able to reflect on the fact that the only way that trust can be re-established is when trust is given. And we believe in a God who ultimately trusts us. And when that trust is betrayed, we get opportunity again and again, like Peter. Are you one of his followers? No, I'm not. This guy who was closest to Jesus, no, I am not one of his followers, because he was frightened and because he was lost. And what do we find again after the resurrection? Jesus dialoguing with him again, saying, "You're the rock on which I'll build this church." Okay, nearly done. There's only 8 of these, 2 more. So Jesus didn't always have it easy. Challenged is this one. These are our year 12 kids, so our 16-year-olds. And we talk about those moments in the church where things were difficult. And I meant to bring, but I forgot. I've actually got a denarius with Tiberius Caesar's head on it. I was going to pass it around. But that moment when he's actually verbally attacked in the middle, this is a no-win situation. There is no answer to the should we pay taxes question. It's death if you don't pay it to the Romans. It's religious suicide if you say that they shouldn't pay it. And Jesus' answer of give to Caesar that which is Caesar's shows that we've got to box clever. In the world in which we live, when we're challenged, we've actually got to think things through. We've got to process the potential. We've got to reflect on what we get from the Gospels, and Caritas is a fantastic organisation that we can sort of connect with in terms of knowing how to respond to issues of justice and social justice, and the rich social teaching in the church is another place that we can go. I love going to the story of Zacchaeus for this too, where we get a guy who's completely stuffed up. He's made massive mistakes, but he wants to see him. All he wants to do is to see Jesus. And I think for us, if that's our beginning point, that all we want to do is actually see with our hearts and our minds, to see what it is that Jesus is calling us to do, we have that potential to respond in all sorts of ways. And in the Zacchaeus story in the Gospel, Jesus doesn't wait to be invited. He says, "I am coming to your house." And the bit that's really powerful about this story is that the people that are surrounding him would have been shocked and horrified that he would invite himself, or that he would actually eat with the sinner, because Jews at the time did not eat with sinners. So they're following him all connected. Jesus is aware that they're all sort of connected with him and get where he's going. And Jesus rocks their world by doing something that's utterly unexpected by them. That dynamic of challenge when everyone is on your side and you're about to turn everyone against you because they need to learn something that they haven't quite learnt yet. There's a really powerful dynamic that happens in that Zacchaeus story that I think often we can miss it. But anyway, so we've done that too, right? There's been moments that if we had time, we might in a couple of minutes think of those times where you've been challenged, you've risen to the occasion, when you've been challenged and you've floundered. And how we've challenged others to live up to. And it's actually a call of discipleship. This in many ways isn't optional. We have to be who we are. But often the challenge that takes place that we're called to engage with is the challenge that happens inside our own hearts and our own sort of working out of what's going. And you sort of need to connect with scripture, with church teaching, with one another to be able to grow in that space. And of course, sometimes we take the easy way. The easy way is not always necessarily bad, but often the reasons that people take the easy way are because there's something they know they're supposed to do and don't. All right, very last one is sent. So after the resurrection, when the apostles are all gathered, and Jesus has had roughly 3 years to sort of work his work, get these people centered. Do you ever reflect on that the apostles and all the disciples, those that he had worked with, have only had a small amount of time, and then Jesus says, right, get on with it. Here's my 20 minutes. pretty much. So go, he says, make disciples of all nations, baptise them in the name of the Father and the Son and the Holy Spirit. This is what we do, right? This is what we're actually participating in. We don't make disciples by forcing them into a space that people don't want to be, but we make disciples by, as St. Francis sort of suggested, preach the gospel every day. And if you have to, use words. We do that again and again. Then we teach. We know that God is always with us. I am sent. You are sent. And sometimes people choose not to go. And I think, again, this happens in moments. And there are moments where we choose to be sent. We actually recognise us on this path of discipleship as being fully in the world. And there are other moments when we recognise it as something that we don't have the strength or the energy at that time. But ultimately, we are sent. So, really appreciate you doing the clicking. Thanks, Terry. Next one. And one more. So, 20 minutes now till we finish. What I'd like you to do is just have a talk to someone next to you. Where have you witnessed some of these steps? I was hoping you can see all of those words. There's welcomed, loved, inspired, called, connected, trusted, challenged, and sent. Just speak with someone next to you and say, where have you witnessed these on your path of discipleship?